Beyond words, our souls collide in the rhythm where dreams reside. Beyond words, we touch the sky.
Welcome to the Beyond Words Deep Dive Sessions, an inspiring exploration of the book Beyond Words by Marsha and John.
For today's deep dive, we're really zeroing in on some fascinating excerpts you all picked out from Beyond Words by Hans de Meyer.
Oh, yeah, de Meyer.
Now, this guy, he's not just some, communication coach.
Yeah.
He spent over 30 years training executives at places like, Microsoft, HP.
Left players.
The big leagues. So we're talking about someone who understands the nitty-gritty of how communication works.
Absolutely. And what I find so interesting about de Meyer is how he pulls from all these different areas like psychology, even a bit of neuroscience.
Like he's giving us the cheat codes to human interaction.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, so for this deep dive, we've got 3 big questions based on what you guys wanted to explore from the book.
I'm ready.
First up, how does our past, our upbringing, actually shape the way we communicate today without us even realizing it?
Right.
Second, what small, and I mean tiny, mental shifts can we make that actually change how people respond to us?
Interesting.
And last but not least, how do we, steer conversations, especially those tricky ones,
I know those ones.
toward a more positive outcome for everyone involved?
Like that.
So de Meyer, he kind of throws this big idea out there. Right off the bat, he says, we're not just one self in a conversation.
Okay.
He compares it to having a house, right, with, get this, 150 mini-me's inside.
150. Wow, that's a lot.
Each one a different side of our personality.
Okay, I think I get it. So it's like I've got my getting stuff done mini-me, and then there's my...
Your life of the party mini-me.
Yeah, exactly. And depending on who I'm talking to or what's going on, a different mini-me steps up.
So say I had a stressful morning, right? And someone comes in with some, critique on a project I'm feeling shaky about.
Uh-oh.
My defensive mini-me might just leap out before I even process what they're saying.
Exactly. And that's what de Meyer's saying, right?
Right.
We're often totally clueless about which mini-me is actually running the show in that moment.
But how do we even begin to, become aware of these mini-me's, these different sides of ourselves?
Well, he says a lot of it goes back to, like you were saying, our upbringing.
Yeah.
Our families, where we grew up, even random stuff that happened to us.
It shapes us.
It all shapes how we see the world and how we talk to each other.
Okay, so we've got these 150 mini-me's shaped by our past. Are we stuck with them? Or can we, trade some out?
Well, de Meyer seems to think there's always room for, personal growth. But it starts with being aware of these frames, as he calls them.
Frames, like picture frames.
Kind of. It's like you're living in this big white room, and as you go through life, you start putting up these frames on the walls. Each frame is a belief you've picked up, a preconception, a way you see things.
And those frames, they end up coloring how we see everything else.
Exactly. And sometimes those frames can really limit us, He tells this great story about Slovenian wine.
Slovenian wine.
Yeah. So he had this idea in his head, this frame, that good wine only came from certain places, and Slovenia wasn't one of them.
I can see where he's going with this.
Right. But then he actually tried Slovenian wine, and he loved it. His whole perspective shifted once he questioned that old frame.
Which is so true. I used to think podcasts were all just news and politics. And then I found this one about...
Don't tell me. Underwater basket weaving.
Close. The history of board games. Totally changed my world.
You and de Meyer both. But okay, so we've got these frames, right? How do we start changing the ones that aren't doing us any favors?
$1 million question.
Right. Well, de Meyer has a few tricks up his sleeve, and one of the simplest but most powerful. He says to try swapping out the word must with can.
Must versus can. Okay, I'm intrigued. Break that down for us. It's like, instead of feeling obligated, you're giving yourself permission.
Exactly. And that little shift can make all the difference, but it doesn't stop there, right? De Meyer dives into this whole other area, nonverbal cues, specifically something called the reticular activating system, the RAS.
Okay, the RAS. Refresh my memory on that one.
Sure. It's that part of your brain that's like a filter for all the information coming at you. Decides what you actually notice and what you just tune out.
Oh, where you get a new car. And suddenly you see that same car everywhere you go.
Bingo. Your RAS is on high alert for that car now. And DeMeyer's point is we can actually use this to our advantage in conversations. If we strategically emphasize certain words or ideas, we can subtly guide people's attention.
So it's not about, like, manipulation. It's more about creating a shared focus.
Exactly. DeMeyer's big on intention here. These techniques, they can be misused, obviously. But when the goal is, genuine connection and understanding, that's where their power lies. It's about creating win-win situations.
It's about being deliberate. Which makes me think about building rapport. Those first few minutes of a conversation. How do we create that sense of trust and connection?
DeMeyer, he says that's essential. And he talks about these things called, get this, mirror neurons. You ever notice how when you're really in sync with someone, you might unconsciously match their body language or tone of voice?
Oh, totally.
He says that's our brains on autopilot. Mirror neurons firing away.
Mirror neurons, meaning, like, my brain is literally reflecting what the other person's doing.
Pretty much. When we see someone do something, the same neurons fire in our brains as if we were doing it. It's how we empathize, how we connect on a deeper level.
So that's why, like, we flinch when we see someone else get hurt, or why laughter can be so contagious.
Yep. Our mirror neurons are hard at work. DeMeyer suggests we use this to build rapport consciously through what he calls matching and pacing.
Matching and what was it again?
Pacing. You subtly, kind of vibe with their energy at first, their body language, how fast they talk. Then gradually you guide the conversation where you want it to go.
It's like you're meeting them where they're at before gently steering the ship, so to speak.
Exactly. And active listening is huge here, too. Not just hearing the words, but really, paying attention to what they're not saying, too.
The nonverbal stuff.
Exactly. DeMeyer suggests things like backtracking, repeating key phrases back to them so they know you're listening. And paraphrasing, like you sum up what they said in your own words to make sure you're both on the same page.
It's like saying, I hear you. I'm not just waiting for my turn to talk. I'm actually trying to understand where you're coming from.
Exactly. And that builds trust. And once you have that, you can start guiding the conversation more intentionally. DeMeyer calls this utilization.
Utilization, like we're, putting those listening skills to good use?
Right. You pick up on cues, a word they keep using, a change in their posture, whatever it is, and you use that insight to steer things in a more productive direction.
We're like conversational detectives, looking for clues.
I love that. And DeMeyer actually suggests that approaching conversations like a game can be incredibly helpful.
A game? Okay, now I'm really curious.
Not Monopoly or anything, but if you go in with that kind of playful, strategic mindset, conversations can become more enjoyable, more productive.
So instead of a battle, it's more like a dance with a shared goal in mind.
Beautifully put. And DeMeyer really stresses going into every conversation with curiosity. Even if you think you know where it's going, stay adaptable.
It's like that improv rule.
You're right.
Yes, and you go with the flow and build on what's being said.
Exactly. Now, remember that SCORE model we talked about earlier? DeMeyer, he uses that to help people clarify their communication goals.
Right. SCORE. What did it stand for again?
Symptoms, causes, outcomes, resources, and effects. It's all about shifting from, complaining about problems to focusing on what you actually want to achieve.
So instead of dwelling on this is wrong, it's more like, what would make this better? What's our ideal outcome here?
Exactly. It's about identifying those desired outcomes and the ripple effects those outcomes would have.
So it's not just putting a Band-Aid on the problem, but going deeper, addressing the root cause.
You got it. That shift in focus is key. When we're clear about what we want, we're more likely to get there.
And this reminds me of how DeMeyer talks about reframing, like shifting your perspective to see new possibilities.
Totally. One of his examples is if someone says, I'm not a tech person, you can reframe it by saying, you've learned so many things in your life, I'm confident you can handle this too.
You're acknowledging their feeling, but showing them a different way of looking at it.
Right. It's not just the words either, it's the energy behind them. DeMeyer encourages swapping out negative words with more neutral or positive ones. Instead of problem, use challenge. Instead of failure, talk about learning experiences. It can make a world of difference.
It's about choosing to focus on solutions, not getting stuck in the negativity of the problem. It seems like a lot of this comes down to asking the right questions.
100%. And knowing which questions to ask at what time. And that's where DeMeyer's P3RAC model comes in.
Ah, yes. His framework for really understanding where someone is coming from.
Right. It stands for purpose, people, priorities, resources, actions, and context. It's like this hierarchy of human experience, and it influences how we see and communicate about the world. DeMeyer, he uses it to help people ask questions that tap into each level so you get a much deeper understanding of their motivations.
So you're not just scratching the surface. You're really digging deep into their values, their beliefs, the whole context of what they're saying.
Exactly. You gather more information, but you also build that rapport, that genuine connection. And that's what it's all about, right?
It's almost like learning a new language,
Yeah.
but the words are the same. We're just using them more mindfully.
And that's what I appreciate about DeMeyer. He's not giving us a script to follow, more like a framework for understanding how communication really works.
Yeah, it's about being more aware, more intentional, which ultimately helps us build stronger connections. Now, was there anything in particular that DeMeyer talked about that really clicked with you?
Well, his take on the reticular activating system, that brain filter we were talking about, really resonated with me, especially the part about pattern interrupts.
Pattern interrupts. Okay, now you got to explain that one.
So our brains are hardwired to pick up on patterns, right? That's how we make sense of the world.
Right.
But those patterns, they can also lead to assumptions and biases.
Okay.
DeMeyer says that when we intentionally break a pattern, we kind of shake things up, and suddenly people are more open to new ideas.
So it's like throwing a curveball to get their attention.
Precisely. It could be as simple as asking an unexpected question.
Like what? Give me an example.
Okay, imagine you're in a sales pitch, right?
Okay.
But instead of launching into your spiel, you say, if you could wave a magic wand and solve one problem in your industry, what would it be?
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
It's not what they're expecting. Makes them think.
Exactly. DeMeyer says that moment of confusion, that mental gap, it makes people more receptive to suggestions. They're not stuck in their usual ways of thinking.
Their brain's got to hit the reset button for a second. That's when a new idea can really sink in.
Exactly. And it's especially useful in those situations where, you're hitting a wall, maybe facing some resistance.
As you're breaking down those walls with that curveball.
Exactly.
But it all goes back to intention, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We can use these techniques to manipulate, or we can use them to connect, to understand.
Couldn't agree more. DeMeyer, he's big on the ethical responsibility we have as communicators. We have to use these tools for good.
Right, because communication, it's powerful. It can build someone up or tear them down.
Absolutely. And the more we learn about how it all works, the better we become at navigating our relationships, our careers, everything.
Well said. This deep dive into DeMeyer's work has been amazing. Really given me a lot to think about and try out.
Me too. It's a good reminder that we're all still learning when it comes to communication.
It's a lifelong journey. And as we wrap up, here's a little something for everyone listening to think about. What's one small change you can make in how you communicate?
Ooh, I like that.
Maybe it's a word you swap out, a question you ask a little differently, even just being aware of which mini-me is about to answer the door in a conversation.
Those small shifts can make a big difference.
You never know till you try, right? So give it a shot this week, see what happens. And as always, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, happy communicating.
Thank you for listening. Give us a like and share your comments. Order the book via the link in the comments. Stay tuned for more.
Beyond words, our soul